All right, welcome everybody. We are going to cover the last section of Transform Running, part 3. So hopefully all of you have been going through and looking at all the various things that we've gone over, looking at posture, looking at your arm swing, looking at how your legs move, and maybe and hopefully you've looked at your cadence, and if not, that's okay. We want to make sure that you shorten that stride and increase the number of steps that you're taking. But if you can get a GPS watch or something that will measure your foot strike, that'll definitely help in measuring your cadence. So now we're getting to part 3, and everything that you've gone over right now is all really about form. This part 3 has to do something with what we learned more from the minimal movement. And minimal was when everyone was kind of on this kick about running barefoot, and they kept saying, well, barefoot's the way to run because so and so is running and they're not injured. Or the book Born to Run had a guy that was able to run barefoot when he and was uninjured, but when he was wearing shoes, he had a difficult time and was always injured, and it was very painful. So then the key must be to run barefoot. So that kind of sparked that type of movement, and a lot of people went to those toe shoes or the Vibram 5 fingers. And at the same time, we saw a lot of people that were getting injured, and a lot of it came down to things that you ramped up and you did too much too soon. And running barefoot isn't for everyone. It does take discipline in order to do that, and you basically have to start with maybe even like 0 mileage, and you need to start walking in those type of shoes first before you can ever get to the point to where you can run even 3 miles in them. So it takes time. But what we did learn from that movement is that we don't do a really good job of taking care of our body and focusing on things that can reduce the chances and the likelihood of injury. And that's part of one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that we included a lot of those cross-training videos and exercise, because that plays a little bit into this. But one of the things that as we move forward, we're going to look at is the dorsiflexion of the ankle, because this can affect a little bit in where your foot lands. So once again, I don't want to really focus that you have to land in a particular spot on your foot, but it can help with your foot strike and shorten that stride if you've got good flexibility. So this starts first with the dorsiflexion of the ankle, and it's one of those things that we kind of look at and say, well, how do we determine if I've got enough dorsiflexion? How do I know I've got enough flexibility to potentially not have any calf issues, Achilles issues, or even plantar fasciitis? So we're going to look at this first image here, and this is a very simple test to kind of look at, what kind of flexibility you have in your calf. So in this image we have here this woman sitting where her knees are kind of bent at a 90-degree angle, and the ankles here are bent in a 90-degree angle. So you have all these 90-degree angles. The feet are flat on the ground, making full contact with the ground. And you're going to use a foam roller or something that you can fairly have upright. It could be up against a wall if you needed to use a wall, but a foam roller will work as well. So as you can see from the first image here, she's kind of sitting back, and then she slides forward and sits on the edge of this step type of equipment. And it could be in a chair that you're doing this. As long as you have that 90-degree angle, you're good. It could be a coffee table. It could be a bench of some sort, something that'll allow you to keep your knees bent at a 90-degree angle. But then you're going to slide forward and kind of sit on the edge. And what you want is, in this case, a foam roller. It could be a wall, but you want your toes placed right at up against it, so that your toenails are either at that wall or at that foam roller. And then when you slide forward, you're going to try to see if you can make contact with the front of your knee to that wall or foam roller without lifting that heel up. So you're going to try to keep your foot fully planted on the ground. So what does this do? Well, what it's allowing us to do is, in this case here, because her knee is very close, I think there's a small little gap, and maybe she can make contact with it. But keeping this ankle, and your heel firmly planted on the ground shows that there's a good amount of flexibility through here, that the calf muscle and the Achilles are not too tight. If they were really tight, then that heel would come up as you kind of make contact with a wall, or in this case, a foam roller. So as you slide forward, if that heel comes up and you're trying to touch that wall, then chances are you've got tight calves and Achilles. So that could potentially lead to calf issues down the road, especially if you start running uphill and your foot strike changes to where you're landing more on your ball of your foot, or even if you're just running flat and you're running more on the ball of the foot, it's going to potentially, best case scenario is you're just going to feel very sore. Worst case would be that over time, your calf muscle starts getting really kind of tight. You may have Achilles issues. It could also cause plantar fasciitis issues, because all of this is kind of part of that kinetic chain that is all connected. So your plantar fasciitis is right where on the bottom of your foot, where your arch typically is, and that's connected to your Achilles tendon, and that's connected to your calf. So all that ends up, kind of, if it's too tight, it's going to pull in all these different areas, and that could lead to a potential injury, discomfort, and pain. So, what you want to try to do then is, do these exercises where you're kind of stretching the calf, and kind of lean up against a wall and plant that heel firmly on the ground, and then stretch. And this is one of those exercises where you want to do after a run, potentially, or just as a stretching exercise. Don't do this before a run. You want to do active stretching where there's actual movement, not static stretching where you're holding a stretch for an extended period of time. So in this instance here, you're just going to stretch that calf. You're going to take one foot and put it kind of behind you, and then your opposite leg will be kind of bent forward, and you're going to lean up against a wall, almost like you're trying to push against a wall, while keeping that heel planted on the ground as much as you can. And it's quite possible that if it is very tight, you're not able to do that. So then shorten that stride a little bit, bring that foot in closer to the wall, so there's less angle, less strain on it, so that you can at least continue to stretch it while keeping that heel planted on the ground. And then as you start loosening up, then maybe you start kind of moving that back a little bit and making it a little bit harder. So these are things that we want to do, and this is a great test to kind of know if you're like, I'm not sure how my calves are, or if they're tight or my Achilles is tight. Do this little simple exercise to help diagnose that, and you can do this on your own, and then do the stretching to kind of help. And I would try to do that, 3 times a week would be awesome. If you do it once, once is better than none. So continue to do that. I would recommend definitely do these type of static type of stretches after your run as much as you can, so that your muscles and tendons don't get too tight, and they'll, as they kind of get back into that resting and cooling state, that they're in that stretched and elongated position, so that they tend to remain stretched out for the rest of the day. So that will definitely help. The next one is a dorsiflexion of the big toe. And once again, this is a very simple exercise to kind of tell whether you'll have, do you have a tight plantar fascia? So what you want to do is, once again, you could be seated. You want your feet firmly planted on the ground, making full contact, And then what you want to do is then reach down and just grab your big toe and see if you can pull that up without the rest of your toes coming up. Try to control it to where the rest of your toes are still making contact with the ground as you pull that big toe up. If the rest of your toes do come up, then chances are that your plantar fascia might be tight and it could lead to problems down the road. So how do you fix it if you do have a tight plantar fascia? Is, as you see here, he's massaging the bottom of that foot, and the plantar fascia is connected down here, starts connected at the heel, and then comes out into this kind of like triangle shape and connects to your metatarsal, which is kind of like at the ball of your foot. So this whole area here is your plantar fascia, and it's kind of creates that arch. So by massaging it, and you can do that by hand if you want, or you can use there's a lot of different items, and we didn't really get into it when we were doing the injury prevention with the Trigger Point clinic. But a ball that's firm that you can use it while you're sitting. Maybe we did cover that. I think maybe we did cover that. You can do it sitting down or standing up, where you're kind of rolling your foot on a firm ball and helping to massage it and loosening it up. There are a couple out there that maybe have little rounded kind of spikes to help even massage it and break it up a little bit. It helps get it a little bit deeper. So that's something that can be done to help improve your plantar fascia, so that it's not really tight, and then down the road you don't get plantar fasciitis, which is what ends up happening with plantar fasciitis. If it's tight and you put it under too much stress and it stretches out too much, you're going to get these little micro tears. And what ends up happening is those little micro tears, overnight when you're sleeping and your foot's in a relaxed and unweighted state, it's going to start healing, and it'll heal in that contracted position. As soon as you put weight on it, it's going to stretch out again, and you're going to feel some discomfort and maybe sharp pain if it's really severe, because now all of a sudden what was healing, it's being torn apart again. So think of it like you were to have a cut on your knee. If you're standing or even laying down, your knee isn't bent, your knee will start healing in that position. But as soon as you get up or bend the knee or bend it too much, then that cut starts opening up again. And that's basically kind of what happens with plantar fasciitis. But imagine that happening every single morning. That's why a lot of people have that initial pain first thing in the morning, and then it gradually dissipates the rest of the day. But overnight, it starts healing again in that position. So there's ways and other things that you can use at night. If it gets really severe, podiatrists will put you in a boot that will kind of keep your foot stretched out so that it heals in that stretched out position, and so that you don't feel that in the morning and that when you put weight on it. But you will be wearing a boot that helps support that, so you won't feel a lot of discomfort. But it becomes very difficult to sleep if you're wearing a very heavy and awkward boot. So there's another item called the Strasbourg Sock, which is typically what most people will do when they get a boot for plantar fasciitis, is that they'll wear the boot during the day, but at night, in order to sleep better, they use a sock. And the sock is exactly what it is it's a sock that you wear that goes over the calf, but at the end here has a strap that attaches above the calf that kind of helps stretch, and pulls your toes back, so that while you sleep, your plantar fascia is stretched out and it starts healing in that stretched out position. So over time, that starts, helping. But a way to avoid it, like I said, is to test this out. Test whether you've got a tight plantar fascia, and if you do, making sure to massage it is one way of doing it, and that's directly at the plantar fascia where you're addressing it. But sometimes that isn't always the root of the problem, but it's a good way of kind of diagnosing it and starting out first. So another thing is, it's what's called toe yoga, and what we want to do is kind of isolate the big toe, and once again, it's a flexibility assessment. It's like how strong is your foot? There's a lot of debate and information, and maybe people that say that are still very much proponents of barefoot running, and there's still some people that say that throughout the day you should probably be barefoot for the most part because it does help strengthen the foot. Whether for those that maybe are always in a shoe or maybe an overly cushioned shoe, there's some people that say that that weakens your foot, that you're more prone to injury um, if you're constantly in a cushioned shoe. And the analogy has been that's been used is basically like imagine if your arm was in a cast. It's protected, but once you remove that cast, if you haven't moved your arm, then your arm becomes weaker. You need to then do certain movement and do rehab to gain strength in your arm again because it's your muscle that's sort of atrophy. So that's basically the analogy that's being used. And to a certain extent, I think that makes a lot of sense. And for some individuals, that may be true. So, you know, isolating the big toe is basically, what you're trying to do is do an exercise that determines if you have enough flexibility, but then this also becomes the an exercise to help improve that flexibility over time. So what you want to try to do, as you see in the first image, is try to keep your big toe planted, but raise your other four toes. If you can do that, great. Now reverse it and lower your four toes and raise your big toe. If you can do that on your own, and it seems like you can do it fairly consistent, that is a sign that you've got good flexibility, but also strength to control those tendons and manipulate them. So some of it may be more coordination and activating those tendons because maybe it's not something that you normally do. So the way the foot moves, even inside a shoe, does require those toes to kind of move independently of each other because as your foot lands, and it doesn't matter really where you land, typically as you kind of roll, even if it's you're landing on your heel and you roll forward, your big toe is what's creating the stability as it's pushing down, and then the other toes kind of pick up before you pick up your entire foot up. So that is a little bit of that motion that's happening. So as you're coming in, your foot is typically landing more on the outside, and as it's rolling in, then it's kind of going to your pinky toes, and then the rest of your toes, and then your big toe is the one where it pushes off. So this helps strengthen the foot because it's a motion that is actually being used while running, even while wearing shoes. But it also helps you kind of coordinate the movement in your toes and helps strengthen the foot. There are some things that, as we move forward, we'll take a look at that once again are being done barefoot, but are great exercises to do. In this case here, we're talking about doing a single leg squat. This is a great exercise, and I've used it a few times when fitting guests in our store. And it's not what I would say. It's not part of our normal fit process. It's definitely I've used it to help diagnose individuals that have come in specifically with an injury because it does help identify what the issue is. Because the shoe is a great place to start, and a comfortable shoe would always help. But if there are some deficiencies in strength or areas of weakness, this exercise can actually help identify some of that. And so that I'll typically, run someone through some of these exercises that kind of help identify where the potential problem may be, and then say, okay, well, you need to do these type of exercises in order to correct for that. So in this case, you can do a single leg squat, and you don't have to go all the way down. Going all the way down is typically what they call a pistol squat, and that is reserved for only those that are very strong and very coordinated. I can't do it. I think it's one of those things that I'd like to say that I could do it, and maybe one day I'll learn how to do it, but you got to get stronger first, and you got to have that base before you can do that. And that pistol squat is basically, having one foot extended all the way in front of you while you do a squat and go all the way down. So in this case here, you're just going to bend the knee and just go down as low as you can without falling, back. So here's one of the things that we'll look at, because if as you start going down and you have what we call here loss of foot contact, in other words, you start losing balance. Maybe you pick up your heel, maybe you shift your weight a little bit. Those are things that can indicate that maybe it's a foot stability issue. Maybe doing some exercises where you're like the toe yoga can help the strength and the stability, but it could be one of those things as well where, we would say, barefoot, when you're at home, maybe while you're brushing your teeth, try to stand on one foot and try to balance, on one foot while brushing your teeth, or maybe it's while you're doing the dishes. Do some of these things where it kind of challenges you to kind of focus a bit, not only on foot stability, but also hip and core stability. So same thing, if you do that single leg squat and your trunk shifts, in other words, kind of your core and your hips, then it could be a weakness in the hips. It could also be some stability issues in the foot. As I said, if the hip drops, that's a pelvic drop. Could be a hip stability issue. So maybe it's the glutes are weak that's causing that to happen. If the knees dive in other words, as you're going down, does this knee kind of track inward a bit? If it does, once again, it's a hip stability issues, and it could be tied to the glutes. Typically this is where we start seeing IT band issues and maybe other types of knee pain. If you go down, you have your hands on your hips, but now your hands come off your hips in order to kind of maintain your balance, then it's a bit of instability, and that can be improved through some core type exercises as well. And then, like I said, loss of balance creates some instability. So doing some of these, maybe mundane, everyday type of routines, like I said, brushing your teeth, maybe, brushing your hair, washing the dishes, maybe as you're, making your coffee, try doing that. Just balancing on one foot is going to help increase the kind of like the nerve receptors that maybe are not firing properly, and get them firing, because now you're challenging yourself to kind of like, okay, these stabilizers within your foot are now being challenged to keep you upright and balanced, and that's going to help by doing some of these things, barefoot, and it's referred to as proprioception, so that your foot kind of feels the changes that's going on, and it's causing the nerves to fire different muscles and tendons to correct for the instability that's happening above, but it also does it below the foot. So if you're running trails, this is something that really helps keep you stable on uneven terrain, on loose and rocky terrain, and keeps you from rolling that ankle, because if your proprioception is fairly good and it's quick, then as soon as that ankle tends to start rolling and your body kind of feels that, okay, something's going on, I'm rolling too far, and if you have that strength in your foot and your proprioception is good, then it's going to quickly fire those receptors to say, change direction, strengthen that, use the strength in your foot and go in the opposite direction. So, and that, applies definitely for trail running, but it could apply definitely as well to inconsistencies in the road. If there's a crack on the sidewalk, if there's a crack in the asphalt, if there's, maybe you're running and not paying attention, all of a sudden there's a pine cone that you happen to step on, that becomes, an area of instability. And so doing some of these things can help reduce some of those injuries because your foot, isn't as strong as it probably should be, but also because you don't have the proprioception, where these nerve endings are not firing as quickly, or not firing at all, because they haven't been used or asked to fire quickly and to react quickly to the different changes in the surface that you're running on. So this is where we get into core strength, and this is why core is really important, because this is typically the first area where we'll see that in your posture, where we'll see a change as you start getting tired, not maintaining a strong posture, not engaging that core. And that's why it's important that as you're one, that you're strengthening that core, that you're working that out, but also that you're once again activating it, that you're conscious of it while you're running, so that it's firing once again the receptors that need to be fired, activating the muscles that need to be activated in order to keep everything in line. So most of the time, it's that weak core that is going to be the cause of most of the injury that's happening in the lower part of the body. So it could be the glutes, the hips, the abs, the obliques that need to be strengthened. And if they are strong, those are the areas that are going to keep this pelvic tilt from happening. So there will be a little bit of a pelvic tilt, and that's okay, because as you move, your hips are going to rotate. Everything's going to change just a little bit. Your leg shortens based on if it's extended forward. Your hips are going to have to accommodate, and they will have to change direction. But if it is too extreme, then that starts causing issues. And in this case here, if this, in this case, if the left side, if that left hip drops too much, the IT band, which is right here, typically it starts up here at the top of the hips and stretches down and comes to the side of the knee, and then sort of wraps and attaches here to the front of your shin. If that ends up happening, you can see that this here is actually kind of pulling it and making it tighter, because it's stretching that IT band out, where in this case here, this leg is shortened, so it's not necessarily pulling it. So pain here in the knee here, on the outside of the knee, and typically I said is IT band or iliotibial band, is most people will say, oh, well, just put a little strap on it, or let's, ice it, or let's foam roll it, massage it. And those things can help a little bit. But the root of the problem is over here. It's a weak glute. It's on the opposite end of the body. And this is why, we want to make sure that we're strengthening the glutes and the core and all that to help ensure that that doesn't happen. And this is one of the things that I learned from personal experience. The first time I, did a marathon, I started having these issues, an IT band issue, a couple weeks before my marathon, and I thought, oh man, what's going on? And I didn't really know what was happening. And during my marathon at mile 16, I stopped to use the bathroom, and once I started running again, the IT band got so tight, it made it very difficult to run, and it became very painful. So all of a sudden, that was at mile 16. At mile 20, I wanted to quit. And I, walked a lot after that, and I crossed the finish line, and I just felt like I will never do a marathon again. But it was later, as I tried to diagnose, to try to learn from my injury, what could I have done better, is where I realized, okay, well, I have weak glutes. So doing some strength training, squats, leg presses, things like that help strengthen the legs, but, also worked on strengthening the glutes. And that's where squats can really kind of help out, and lunges really helps out. So that really helped me, because then I went again the next year and I didn't really have IT band issues. I felt a little bit of a twinge, like it could be coming on, but I was able to finish. And in doing so, I took 20 minutes off of my marathon time, which is a huge PR when you're thinking about, a marathon. Most people, if they PR, they're PRing by seconds or even minutes. And, we're talking by a few minutes, probably, a minute to two, maybe three, especially at that beginner stage. But 20 minutes was huge, all because I was able to, preemptively correct something before my next marathon. So and like I said, these typically will start coming up as you start getting into longer runs, but it varies from individual to individual because if someone has very weak glutes or very weak core, an IT band could pop up, and issue could pop up like as you're training for a 5K. Someone else, it may pop up when they're training for a marathon, but it's there. It's just a matter of being preemptive about it and taking care of your body. It's not always about putting in long miles and training on the road all the time. It is those off days where you can do some cross training to help strengthen those areas that are potential weaknesses and could sideline you for a while. So core strength is one of the things that we definitely look at, glutes and all that. Like I said, this is kind of where I was mentioning about the knee pain, the IT band pain. As you can see here, the graphic states, a strong gluteus medius here tends to keep the pelvic tilt from being too extreme. It's the pelvic looks stable, and this is kind of where you want, where if you're looking at the IT band that comes down here, it's not really stretched out as it is in this position here, where here you have a weak gluteus medius, and that's causing an extreme pelvic tilt. So those can definitely help determine kind of what those areas of weaknesses are, and that's why doing those single leg squats can give me a little bit of an idea of if it's leg strength or if it's glute strength. But as you can also see here, the other thing is lower back pain, and that's something that a lot of beginners will maybe experience. Is, as you can see here, that spine is fairly upright and there's not a lot of strain. As soon as that pelvic drops, now you're causing kind of this unnatural curve of your spine, and that's going to affect the muscles in your lower back, and that's what can cause that lower back pain. So once again, having a strong core helps protect this whole area here. Having a strong gluteus medius keeps this pelvic level as possible. It doesn't have an extreme tilt to it, and in that case reduces the chances for lower back pain. So that's one of those things that if you're feeling IT band pain or any type of knee pain, you're not going to want to run. It's going to sideline you. Same thing if you've got lower back pain. If you're, you may get to a point where you don't even feel like getting out of bed. So these are things that you can do to preemptively take care of any injuries. But they're also great ways of if you do happen to be injured, of then fixing the injury, and it can be done through these exercises and done in a very natural way, and hopefully without needing any surgery. So this is one of the things that if you do have to see a doctor for some of these type of issues, make sure you see a doctor that is familiar with running injuries. Make sure it's either a doctor that runs or a doctor that is well versed with runners or has worked with runners as patients before. A sports medicine doctor is I would say would be what would be recommended. Because we have seen people that have gone to a doctor and they say, well, I have a knee pain, I have this, and they find out you're a runner. They say, well, just quit running. And that's really only in extreme cases would that be something I would say, okay, well, that makes sense. For the most part, if you're having any type of these discomforts or injuries, there are ways to correct it if you find and work with the right medical professional and they understand how the body works, specifically with running. So this, one of the things as we look at core strength, once again, your core is, your obliques, your abs, your glutes, your hips, all that is part of your core, and we want to strengthen all that. So by having a strong core, you can actually reduce some of that knee pain, the IT band pain. Like I said, if you've got an extreme pelvic tilt, the lower back pain, already talk about that. But one of the things that we haven't really talked about is that increased pronation. And that pronation is when that ankle tends to roll in. If you're landing and your foot tends to roll in when it's in full contact on the ground, that's what we call an overpronation. Everyone pronates, but people pronate to varying degrees. It could be, it's not necessarily tied to whether you have a high arch or a low arch. There's people that will pronate with both of those, but it could be associated with things, like I said, if you have a weak glute and your hip has an extreme pelvic tilt, and it causes that need to dive in, it may cause that ankle to roll in as well. So by fixing all these things here, we may actually be able to decrease the pronation and any discomfort that you're having and the way the knee kind of bends. Ideally, you want, even if you do pronate, we want you to kind of have where your knee is kind of aligned with the front of your foot and your ankle, not to where it creates this kind of weird bend, because it could hurt the inside of your knees. It could create additional pressure here on your ankle, even your arch, but also cause issues with your hip. And then if this is happening on the opposite leg, then this is where you may be getting IT band pain from your IT band. So there's and as it says here, you can also sprain your ankle a little bit if you tend to roll in, and especially if you're on unlevel surfaces, if there's a crack or broken ground, whether it's asphalt, concrete on a sidewalk, or you happen to go on trail, you can risk an ankle sprain by rolling it. So those are things that why we tend to really encourage you to do more than just run, but to do these various exercises and to cross train. If you're able to go to a gym once they open up, or if you feel comfortable now going to a gym, then do those exercises that strengthen the lower legs. Do the leg squats. Do weights where you're doing the lunges. Maybe you're holding weights and you build up to where you can do weights, but start out with lunges. Start doing just squats, even if it's just body weight, and then once you start going to a gym, start adding some resistance by adding some weights and getting stronger. All that is going to help you not only become a better runner and enjoy running better, but it reduces the chances of those injuries. So this last slide here is one of those things that we talk about, and this is something that can easily be done to help increase that flexibility. And if you've ever watched the Olympics and the track and field events, or maybe even the start of a marathon, or any type of where you have a lot of elites or professional runners, or for that matter, you can see this probably at your local school before a track meet, because they're taught all this. They've been taught how to run properly. So they do this as drills to kind of help improve their running form, but it's also a great way of warming up before a race. So doing these skips where you're kind of skipping, by once again activating the hip flexors, making sure that you're picking your knees up and that your upper leg is parallel to the ground. Doing these type of skips where you're alternating legs are going to warm you up beforehand, and this is where we would say this is great exercise to warm up. If you're getting and you're picking up your knees, you're getting that stretch through your hamstrings and through your glutes as well. So this could be considered an active form of stretching. High knees is one of the exercises I've kind of brought up. I think it was in the first cross training video, and the way I did it was more of an exercise that you do it without elevating your heart rate. But this is a great way of kind of doing it, kind of like almost like running in place, but picking that knee up and bringing it up really high in order to, once again, it helps warm you up prior to a race, or even just a regular run, but it helps stretch out your hamstrings. And this is typically, and this would be more of an advanced type of class if we were going to get into it, is that a lot of your speed comes, yes, it comes from being stronger as a runner because you're cardiovascular, because you're able to breathe better and you strengthen your lungs and to kind of push. So a lot of it's cardiovascular. A lot of it is just putting in the longer mileage. But truly to get that breakthrough is increasing this flexibility to pick up your knees up high and to lengthen that stride, the distance between your forward and back leg in a way that is increased by the forward momentum, but also by picking the legs up and picking that knee up is going to definitely help. So like I said, that's more an advanced type if you really want to kind of get into it. But the high knees is a great way of, once again, reinforcing those good running form. By doing so, if you do this kind of in place and you do it on a regular basis, that's going to translate and teach your body how it's supposed to move. Now, this is an extreme movement and you're not going to run exactly like this, but it does kind of teach your body, it's like, this is how the knee's supposed to feel, this is how the hips are supposed to feel, and it warms them up prior to a run so that when you go out for that run, you may actually feel a little bit more like, wow, my stride feels differently, it feels smoother, it feels better, I feel lighter because you're not as tight. Butt kicks is, one of those things where, you kind of have to practice how to do it, because I know when I first tried doing it, I wasn't doing it properly. I've tried to do it where I kind of swing the leg back and try to kind of kick, my butt with the heel by swinging the leg back. And that's really not the way you're supposed to do it. What you're trying to do is kind of very similar, kind of in place, like running in place, bend the knee to kick up your heel. So once again, it's the flexibility here in your glutes that you're trying to do. If this is really tight in your glutes, then you're not going to be able to bend that knee well enough to swing to where your heel is kicking your butt. So once again, it's a great exercise to do as you warm up for a run. It's a great exercise to do before a race. And then scissor kicks is kind of just like running in a very kind of, kicking your feet out ahead of you. Once again, it helps lengthen your stride by loosening up your hip flexors. As you can see here, the hip flexor is extended in this backward position. That's what gives you that extra kick and that extra longer stride. So another great way to warm up. So these are drills that all these athletes are doing, whether you're, if you're middle school, high school, college, these are drills that have been trained and they continue to do. If you are able to, run, in school, and you are able to then go into more of a professional and elite level, they're still doing those drills as well. It's tried and true and tested. These drills work. And once again, you're trying to teach your body and your legs specifically how they're supposed to move. And this would be very comparable to if you play golf, going to a driving range and hitting ball after ball after ball. You're trying to teach your arms how to swing that club. This is the same thing. You're trying to teach your legs how they're supposed to move. So in all these exercises, and on through these drills, you want to try to land as light as possible, because that's going to transfer to that more efficient way of running once you've incorporated everything else that we've covered. Posture, head placement, arm swing, cadence, all that will be reinforced as it all comes together. So this is the last part of the drill. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in, who's gone through this program. As always, email me at peachy@bigpeachrunningco.com. At this point, you're at the end of, should be at the end of week 5. So you still have 3 more weeks of training, and you should be ready for your 5K or 10K on or around July 4th. They are, even though Peachtree has been canceled and some of these other races have been canceled, there are a few 4th of July themed virtual races that you should, check out. They are typically going to a charity of some sort. And if you wanted to test your fitness out, and if you've gone through these 8 weeks of training and say, well, what was it all for? What was I training for? This is a good way of kind of saying, well, let's sign up. Let's use this as a goal to really kind of push through these last 3 weeks and, use that race as kind of like that goal that you're going for, because it'll set you up, if you have signed up for the Peachtree when it happens on Thanksgiving in November, it'll get you that much more prepared, because now you've gone through and you've peaked at your fitness at the end of this 8-week program. And then you'll have some time, once again, to kind of rest, maintain that level that you're at before you pick up again, probably in September We'll look at the training program because we will relaunch this again for the fall. But you've already have kind of a head start on anyone who hasn't trained during the summer. And the summer heat is also making you stronger. It's helping you build, your cardiovascular, because it does become a little bit harder to breathe with the humidity. So it's creating stronger lungs for you. It's just making you also mentally stronger and tougher to push through this time, because anything that becomes difficult, if you can go through it, mentally makes you stronger. And that's one of the biggest things that in any type of sport or physical type of activity that people tend not to really give enough credit for is that mental toughness, the ability to kind of stick with it and push through it and convince yourself, to motivate yourself to go with it. The training is great, but it's those times when things are not going great, when you're having a difficult time, when you're putting those miles in and it doesn't feel easy and it just feels harder. It gets that much better mentally if you push through that and you feel more accomplished because you did something very difficult and you earned it. And that is a great accomplishment and something that you should feel proud of yourself. So stick with it. Like I said, only 3 more weeks. Use this information to improve your running. I do hope that you're getting some enjoyment out of it, even though it is much warmer these days. But hopefully it is something that will, our goal is that you become a lifelong runner. Doesn't mean you have to race all the time, but that you go out and you enjoy it for that release, for the health benefits of it, for the mental benefits of it, for the stress reduction of it. So just keep at it, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.